Yayınlanmış 20'den fazla araştırması var onun. 3 tane kitabı var. Çok meşhur bir konuşmacı, dünyayı dolaşıyor ve ona psikolojinin Indiana Jones'u diyorlar. İsmi Dr. Robert Biswas Diener. Alkışlarla buraya geliyor Dr. Robert Biswas Diener. Hoş geldin. Now you can speak some Turkish, right? You're starting to understand a little bit. Why do they call you the Indiana Jones of psychology?
To embarrass me.
To embarrass you.
Yes.
I had no means to embarrass you.
Yeah.
So stage is all yours.
Thank you. 1 second, please. Thank you. If you could all just scoot over. And we'll do one more with me in it. Thank you. Perfect. When I was a small boy, I was afraid of everything. I was afraid of snakes. I was afraid of spiders. I was afraid of the dentist. I was afraid of windmills. I was afraid of heights. I was afraid of the toilet. I was afraid of the dark. I was afraid of my closet. I was afraid of the forest. I was afraid of the place under my bed. I was afraid of flying on the airplane. So, when my editor asked me to write a book on courage, I thought she was joking. And I knew that if I was going to write a book on courage, I would have to face my fears. I would have to overcome my nightmares and try and do something courageous. So I decided to go skydiving. Who here has ever been skydiving before? One person, very brave, I like you. I registered, paid my money. I went on my lunch break. I don't know what you do with your lunch break, but it took 2 hours. I just left my office, drove to the airplane, went skydiving, was back for work in the afternoon, checking my email. Before we got on the airplane, I was very nervous. I was sweating, my heart was beating fast. But my instructor, he turned to me and he said something that really, really relaxed me. He said, "Just listen, Robert. If the airplane has any kind of mechanical difficulty, we'll just jump out." It was the safest I have ever felt on an airplane. Because we had parachutes on. We could just jump out. Then I asked him, "How many times have you ever been skydiving before?" And his answer was more than 8,000. So I knew, statistically, this was not going to be the bad jump. Statistically, he was going to stay alive. And if he was going to stay alive, I was going to stay alive. And it was interesting to me because I had to engage in a number of techniques to manage my own fear, to raise my level of commitment, to get me to do this very difficult activity. It's the same types of strategies that I'm going to talk to you about today that are just as relevant to the workplace, just as relevant to the boardroom as they are to the runway, as they are to skydiving. What I hope to talk with you about is what is courage? Why do we have courage? Can courage be learned? If so, how can we get more of courage? And what is its relevance to the workplace in particular? So let's take our tour. When many people think of courage, their mind immediately thinks of physical bravery, soldiers fighting in war, emergency personnel like firefighters rushing into a building and saving people. But there are so many different types of courage. When you stick up for an unpopular idea in a meeting, that's a form of courage. When your child goes off to school for the first time, that's a form of courage. When an entrepreneur opens a new business, again, a different type of courage. There's social courage, financial courage, moral courage, physical bravery. There's so many different types. Psychologists basically define courage like this. For an act to be brave, it must have three different components. You must face a personal risk. It could be the risk of losing face, losing a sense of honor, being embarrassed. It could be a financial risk where you lose money. It could be a physical risk where harm or injury comes to you. The outcome has to be uncertain. If you know what is going to happen, it cannot be brave. You have to be uncertain about the outcome. And finally, you have to experience fear. Without fear, there is no courage. So a brave action has to have all three of these components. Why on earth do we have courage? Courage, like its cousin, fear, are both gifts from evolution. Fear is extraordinarily functional because fear helps us manage our actions. It helps keep us prudent. It helps us from taking irresponsible risks. This is as worthwhile in business as it is in our social lives. Not long ago, I was walking with my father near to a pond, and on the walkway there were some ducks eating. And I want to use these ducks as an illustration of why we have courage and how evolution has gifted us courage. As my father and I walked along, there was a group of ducks that immediately were very, very frightened, and they flew into the water for safety. As we moved closer, there was a second group of ducks, and that second group then also flew into the safety of the water. And we continued forward, and the third group of ducks never moved. They never got out of our way. Of these three groups, it was the middle group that were the courageous ducks, the optimally courageous ducks. The very first group, those that flew away, those that were very frightened, they gave up an important advantage because they gave up their food source to the other ducks that had more courage. I'm not just saying this as a metaphor, I'm saying this where organizations, where financial transactions are concerned. Because if you lack courage, if you only approach business through prudence and control and sure things, you give up your position, you give up your advantage to those who are willing to take risks. And the history of business is full of people who launched exciting new design and products. The middle group of ducks, these were the optimally courageous. But what about the ducks over here? What about that last group? The last group of ducks that never flew away, they were too courageous. They were too brave. And in the long run, evolution is going to weed them out because we can capture these ducks, we can eat these ducks, we can get these ducks. They're too brave. You need to have the right balance between a certain amount of fear, a healthy vigilance for what can go wrong, and balance that with the ability to take risk, especially strategic and targeted risk. So if evolution has gifted us with both fear and courage, it makes sense to ask, who has courage? Where does courage live? Does courage live in children? Does it live in the elderly? Do men have it? Do women have it? It turns out that men are far more likely to exhibit physical acts of bravery. This could be due to base rate statistics, above all else. Men typically are police officers at higher rates than are women. They serve as emergency personnel, firefighters, soldiers, paramedics, at much higher rates than do women. So men are in positions where they can engage in physical acts of bravery far more commonly than women are. I'm not, of course, saying that women can never engage in physical acts of bravery. Of course you can. It's just that men are far more likely to, and in fact then this becomes the traditional stereotype of bravery, a very masculine, very male-oriented type of physical bravery. Interestingly, the research shows that where bravery is concerned, women appear to have more of it than men. That's right. Congratulations, women. You're doing well. Once you get rid of physical acts of bravery, women dominate. Women are far more likely in surveys, if you look at awards for brave action, women are far more likely to win awards, to donate organs, to engage in risky volunteer types of behaviors. For example, Médecins Sans Frontières, the Doctors Without Borders. Women are disproportionately greater volunteers for these types of programs. In data collected in the United States, at least, women donate a disproportionate number of organs, especially kidneys, more so than men. So when it comes to social courage, when it comes to moral courage, courage that helps others in a non-physical way, but in a brave way nonetheless, women seem to dominate the field. And I think that's good news. But most of the data, unfortunately, that I'm talking about come from the United States of America. And it's a little unfortunate that so much research comes out of America. I myself am an American, but I am not so egocentric to think that American culture applies everywhere. Let's look at courage samples outside of the United States. My colleague at the University of Michigan looked at a number of virtues, things like creativity, generosity, leadership, courage, forgiveness, 24 different virtues. And he looked in more than 50 different countries, and he wanted people to rank order their amount of courage. A rank of number 1 means this is the most important virtue out of all of the 24. A rank of 24 means it's the least important. Americans think that humility is the least important. They rank that as 24. Perhaps here you would say hospitality might be number 1, most important. I'm going to show you 2 numbers. The first one is the rank order between 1 through 24. The lower the number, the better. The second number, in parentheses, is going to be a courage score for the entire country. It's going to range between 1 and 5. So let's look at the United States. Of the 24 virtues, Americans think that courage is the 16th most important. And they rate it a 3.67 out of 5. They think, yes, we definitely have courage, and it's important, but certainly there are other virtues that are more important. Compare this to Singapore, roughly the same. Singaporeans think that there are many other virtues, forgiveness, curiosity, learning, that are much more important, and they roughly have the same amount. The United Kingdom, again, doing slightly better, but still we're talking about the same neighborhood. Germany, again, almost identical from the United Kingdom. You essentially find a pattern of events that says that people believe that courage is important, not the most important, but certainly useful, and they believe that collectively, yes, we have it. Let's take a look at Turkey. Turkey is in a different ballpark. Turkey is completely different than all the other countries that I've listed here. The Turkish respondents think this is the 10th most important virtue. Turkish people, according to this survey, think that courage is more important than Americans think it is, than Germans think it is, than Singaporeans think it is. And Turkish people report having more courage. Turks love courage. Interestingly, if you look at culture, researchers have basically divided culture into 3 different types. There are cultures of dignity, cultures of honor, and cultures of face. And each of these 3 types of cultures pushes people towards courageous action in a slightly different way. First, there are cultures of dignity. I come from a culture of dignity. Cultures of dignity are extraordinarily individualistic. Cultures of dignity believe that the individual is the most important unit, and the individual should defy authority. They should stand up for what they believe. Kids can go into any field they want. Their parents just want them to be happy. Everybody is seen as completely equal in worth. That's a culture of dignity. When I am likely to act out in a courageous way, it's when I see someone else robbed of dignity. When I see someone being treated in an unequal way, that's when I am going to be pushed towards courage, especially in the workplace. People from cultures of dignity are excellent advocates for others. They stick up for the underdog on their team. People from cultures of face, these are places like South Korea, Japan, China. These are people with an outside-in perspective who are extremely sensitive to the social context, to how they should be behaving in the moment, and they have an extraordinarily hierarchical society. And the third group, cultures of honor. Turkey would qualify as a culture of honor. Culture of honor falls somewhere in between culture of dignity and culture of face. Honor, as I'm sure you're well aware, becomes this idea that reputation is important, that action is preceded by a threat to personal reputation, company or work reputation, and especially family reputation. And it is threats to these that push people from cultures of honor towards courage. Let's see who else has courage. On your left-hand side, there is a sample of college students. One bar, the blue bar, represents the willingness to act, the ability to commit to action even if it's uncertain. The red bar represents the amount of fear. So you can see that college students, they're slightly more willing to act than they are afraid. You need the proportion to be that direction. If you have more fear than willingness to act, then you're paralyzed. If you have more willingness to act than fear, you're willing to work things out, you're willing to commit, you're willing to persevere. Next over, you have a community sample of normal adults. This is just an average sample from the same community that the college students came from, ranging in age from 18 to about 65. And you can see that they look about the same as the college students. They have a slightly higher willingness to act, mildly better at controlling their fear, but basically the same as the college students. Then look what happens. As we jump over to the third sample, these are police officers, firefighters, and paramedics. These are emergency personnel. And here, suddenly, you find a big difference. You find a jump up in people's willingness to act and a much better ability to regulate that emotion, to dampen the fear response. The ROTC, that's the Reserve Officer Training Corps. In the United States, these are military officers in training. Again, you see a very big discrepancy between these two aspects. One, high willingness to act. Two, a very good ability to manage fear. Now, one of the things I think that this is suggestive of that's quite interesting is that, that essentially you could learn courage. If you have a normal sample of individuals, and then you have these other groups of people that are in jobs that require courage, they are police officers, they're army officers, then suddenly they've learned techniques to manage their fear, and they've also learned techniques to push forward even when things are uncertain. But finally, let's look at executives, organizational executives, and let's see how they stack up compared to everyone else. Executives report more courage than any other group. Think about that. That was shocking when I first saw that statistic. Executives report a much higher willingness to act and are much better at managing fear than police officers are, than military officers are. Executives, either because they have a certain genetic code and this leads them into the work of being an executive, which I don't think is the case, or they have a job that demands of them daily opportunities for courage, daily opportunities to evaluate risk, to manage risk, to push forward into an ever-changing and uncertain economic climate. Executives have managed to edge out every other sample where courage is concerned. Speaking of executives, I'd like you to meet Jill Nelson. Jill lives in Portland, Oregon, a very beautiful city in the United States. She's about 43 years old. And when she was 35, Jill started a company called Ruby Receptionists. Ruby Receptionists essentially is a group of virtual receptionists. They act as a call center for small and medium-sized businesses. Jill's very smart, she's very hardworking, and she was able to grow her business in a very short amount of time from about 5 employees and just a couple of clients to about 70 employees and roughly $5 million a year budget. She's a small company, but growing all the time and very successful. So successful, in fact, that Ruby Receptionists was just rated the #2 business to work for in the entire state of Oregon, which is where she's located. So the state of Oregon has about 4 million people, one of the 50 United States, and this is the #2 business in the entire state to work in. So I was curious, Ruby's Receptionist is one of my organizational clients. I was curious, what makes this such an enormously good place to work? Do they offer better pay and benefits? Do they have better vacation time? better maternity leave. I took metrics from everybody, and I was interested in what would correlate with job satisfaction. What are the predictors of job satisfaction at Ruby Receptionists? Let's take a look. Interestingly, these are all significant, by the way, statistically significant. So they're all predictors of job satisfaction. But interestingly, pay and benefits is the least important of all of them. Pay and benefits definitely matters. If people have good benefits, if people have good pay, they are slightly more satisfied with their work. But of all the different factors, it was the least important. The most important, as you can see, of course, was the job itself, the tasks, having the opportunity to do what they do best each day, and the tasks of the job. People want to enjoy their work. But the one that really fascinated me were the two correlations that were about 0.45. The organizational culture and the feeling that your voice is heard at work. Those two predictors in particular are the direct product of courage. Jill Nelson, the MD of Ruby Receptionists, created a culture in which she wanted people to speak up for what they saw going right and going wrong in the workplace. Anytime they wanted to launch a new initiative, a new service package, anytime that she wanted to make any kind of organizational structural change, anytime that she wanted to make any procedural or rule-based change that would affect the workers, she wanted the workers' input. And she would hold focus groups. And she created a microculture in which they were able to voice dissenting and oppositional opinion. And she had the courage to listen to them. I attribute much of their organizational culture, and it's a wonderful culture, directly to Jill Nelson's courage and her ability to listen to unpopular views or views that run counter to her own. Running these focus groups has allowed Jill to get increased buy-in from the Rubies, from the people who work at Ruby Receptionists. Now, mind you, these are call center workers. You have call centers here. It's not particularly good work. They work in cubicles, some long shifts. They have to get up early in the morning before the sun comes up so that they can start taking calls in New York, even though they live way out on the Pacific Ocean. Since she started this campaign, she was able to raise longevity. Retention went up. Let's take a look at the average call center worker at Ruby Receptionists. The average is more than 6 years, just absolutely extraordinary. The savings in recruitment, placement, and training is enormous, and it's one of the keys that allows for the kind of growth that Ruby Receptionist has enjoyed. And I lead it back directly to her ability to be courageous in the atmosphere and the culture that she promotes. This is Heinz Landau. For 9 years, he was the managing director of Merck, Thailand. He says soft skills are the new hard skills. Once we control for technology, once we control for competencies, traditional competencies, what we're left with is our true competitive advantage. Things like curiosity, creativity, and courage. And those organizations that are best poised to leverage these soft skills are going to have a more flexible and adaptive advantage. In thinking about who has courage and what do we know about courage, I decided to do some research of my own. I went out and I interviewed 50 people who come from all different walks of life who are highly courageous. For example, Andrew Stern, he's the one in the middle. Andrew is a war photographer, a combat photographer. He travels to Iraq, to Lebanon. He was in Palestine many times. And I think that an enormous part of his job demands courage. He sometimes worries that he will be shot by tanks, that he'll be struck by a missile. He often has to go into places where there are landmines. I interviewed people like Candace Glass. Candace Glass gave up a job as a school teacher that paid a steady income and it felt meaningful and rewarding. And instead, she realized a lifelong dream of opening a yoga studio. It's a small studio. She has 2 employees. And yet, I would argue that this small example of entrepreneurialism can cast light onto the process of courage. I interviewed people like Frida Lo. Frida Lo, there in the middle, she is Singaporean, and she trains the young Singaporean soldiers in confidence. How does she train them in confidence? She shoves them out of airplanes. She does confidence jumps with the young trainees in the Singaporean army. She's all the much more brave to do this, not just because skydiving is terrifying, but because she is a woman in a heavily male-dominated area. Sarah Otten. Sarah Otten is interesting because she is a physical adventurer. At age 24, Sarah decided that it would be fun to row a boat across the Indian Ocean. Has anyone here ever rowed a boat across the Indian Ocean? It took her 128 days. She was by herself. She capsized on more than one occasion. She was almost run over by freighters. And she lost 20 kilograms in the process. The very first lesson I learned after talking to these 50 people, everyone from executives to yoga studio owners, was what I call courage blindness. Interestingly, most people are completely unaware of their own courage. So let me just put the spotlight on you here in this room today. I believe that you have a personal history of courage. I believe that you are brave individuals. I believe that you have made a lifelong habit of courage. And I think that you would do well to own that sense of bravery. To think that you are extraordinary in this respect. And yet, people are very poor at recognizing their own courage, in part because they don't always know what courage is, but also because courage often is so aligned with our values that it seems ordinary, or it happens so automatically, we forget that it's extraordinary. Let me tell you a quick story. Last year, I gave out a cash prize for courage. I gave away free money for courage. I said, if you think you've been courageous or you know someone who's been courageous, please send me a nomination. I'm going to give out some money. And I sat back and I waited and waited, thinking, wow, this is going to be big. I can't wait to hear the stories. And 1 hour turned into 1 day. 1 day turned into 1 week. 1 week turned into 1 month. And not a single story of courage came out. What happened? People have courage blindness. Finally, the person who won the cash prize, let me tell you their story. Her name was Lori. Lori was riding her bicycle with her friend, and her friend flew off a cliff. hit her head on a rock, knocked herself unconscious, and landed face down in a river. Her friend was drowning. Lori, this woman Lori, jumped off her bicycle, off the cliff, into the water, grabbed her friend, swam to the side, and saved her friend's life. Only later did she realize that she broke her own leg and broke her own arm in the process. I said, Lori, wow, how courageous. And she said, what are you talking about? That wasn't brave. And then she said the sentence I heard from everybody. She said, I just did what anyone would have done. I just did what anyone would have done. And she wasn't trying to be humble. She's American. She doesn't have it in her. She actually could not see what she was doing as brave. I said, Lori, you did not do what anyone would have done. Do you know that you could have just stood there and screamed? Do you know that you could have called on your mobile for help? Do you know that you could have carefully climbed down the cliff? Do you know that you could have waved to a car for help? And when I started saying these alternatives, she was so surprised to hear them. She said, I never thought of that. I can't believe it. I thought I was just doing what anyone would have done. Nothing is further from the truth. She is not doing what anyone would have done. And this is exactly what happens in the workplace. It's exactly what happens in families. It's exactly what happens in your own personal life. You're acting like a hero in extraordinary ways, and you are overlooking it. You're forgetting the special quality of courage because it comes so quickly, so automatically, and is so in line with our values. Can courage be learned? Yes. Yes, it can. This is good news because it means we can teach it in the workplace, if nothing else. Another study by my colleague at University of Michigan, Chris Peterson, he asked parents about those same 24 virtues: creativity, forgiveness, kindness, curiosity, courage. And he asked parents, do your children have these virtues? 38% of the parents said that their children were kind. That was the number one virtue. Almost 40%. Yes, my child is kind. How many said that their child was courageous? 7%. Fewer than 1 in 10. The truth is, and no offense to any children in the room, but kids are not courageous. Kids are capable of doing a courageous action, but typically kids are afraid. Kids are not good at regulating their own emotion. We have to learn that through maturity, through experience. This is why kids like little stuffed animals when they go to bed, why they want a parent to come tuck them in. They want a small light left on. It's very sweet. They just don't have the same capacity to manage their own fearful responses. They develop it. They learn it over time. There's another theory, a psychological theory, that also suggests a way that courage can be learned. And it is a distinction between personal and general courage. General courage would be courageous if anyone did it. Running into gunfire and saving a fallen comrade if you're in the military, That's general courage. Everyone would think that that's brave. Personal courage, on the other hand, is only brave if you do it. Personal courage is, it's overcoming a personal limitation. So when I get onto the airplane, because I'm afraid of flying, that's an act of courage for me. But it's not an act of courage for you because you're not afraid of flying. Personal courage offers us each, as individuals, an opportunity to face our fear, to manage our fear, and to increase our willingness to act. Another organizational client of mine, Monster Fuses, they are a Need It Now company. Essentially, they provide industrial fuses for large businesses that are in the dark. Their fuses have blown, their electricity is out, they need their electricity right now. Monster Fuses puts their electricity back on. Anywhere in the United States or Canada, they'll hire a private jet, they'll get you your fuse of any type immediately. I recently went into Monster Fuses and talked to the director. And he said, I want you to come in and do some work with us. And I said, I want you to know that if I work with you, you're not going to like it. You personally. Because probably a lot of the change is going to have to come from you. Of course, we're going to do some things with the culture. We're going to do some things with the line managers and so forth. But really, you're going to be responsible for change, and probably some of it's going to be changing yourself. You're going to have to take a good, hard look at yourself. You're going to get some 360 feedback. You're not going to like everything you hear. And he said, bring it on. He said, bring it on because I love to exercise. And if I feel nervous, I'm just going to go for a run. And then I'm going to use that 360 feedback and I'm going to put it into action. And he illustrated for me two of the distinctive processes in leadership development that are related to courage. One is deflating fear, pushing fear down and managing our fear response. And the second is increasing willingness to act. These are two separate processes. You would think that one just goes with the other. But when you think of your courage quotient really is your ability to act courageously by dampening fear and increasing willingness to act. And these two separate processes are anchored in your brain. We have an entire system, the behavioral inhibition system, that is directly geared towards limiting our response, towards activating fear, towards being vigilant for problems, for caution. We have a secondary system called the behavioral activation system, and it is reward sensitive. This system propels us forward. It's willing to take risks. It's looking for things that are fun, exciting, new, interesting. And these two systems play a sort of a tug of war. They're a balancing act. And by harnessing each of these, you can manage your fear, raise your willingness to act. What I'm going to do in our final time together is just give you one strategy for each. Let's start with controlling fear. This is the world's largest skateboard ramp. A skateboarder by the name of Danny Way decided that he was going to jump the Great Wall of China. Has anyone ever seen video of Danny jumping the Great Wall of China? No? What do you do in your spare time? Danny went and practiced on a smaller ramp the day before, and he broke his ankle. And he decided, let's still go ahead and do the big jump. And I think it's really fascinating to watch the video because he climbs the staircase up, up, up, up, up to the top of the world's tallest skateboard ramp. And there's a moment in the video where he just stops, and you can see that the fear is too much. The fear has taken control of him. He just puts his hand out, and he hangs his head, and he holds completely still. And then after a second, he lifts his head, he grabs a skateboard, he walks to the edge of the ramp, and he just goes for it. Lands perfectly. Had so much fun doing it, he did it 5 times. But there's that moment of fear. You can see in the video that he's really wrestling inside. How can we, like Danny, face those moments? I'll tell you one strategy. Magical thinking. Magical thinking is a poorly understood but really wonderful aspect of human psychology. We all, to some degree, think magically. Many people have some superstition. It varies from culture to culture. Sometimes it has to do with mirrors, black cats, ladders, cracks in the sidewalk, spilling salt, all sorts of different superstitions. These are just magical thinking. And many people have a lucky object. In English, we would say a talisman. A small lucky object. In one study, they asked people to bring in their lucky object, something that they feel is special. And the people that held these lucky objects outperformed people who did not have a lucky object. In all other ways, these two groups were exactly the same, except one group had a lucky object, one group did not. The group with the object were better at memory tasks. They had significantly better memories when they had the lucky object. They did a little golf test. They were better golfers. They had no prior experience golfing. It was only attributable to having the lucky object. There is a good chance that you yourself have a lucky object. If you're a man, perhaps you have a special tie that you like to wear because it gives you confidence and you feel like you'll give a good presentation if you wear this tie. Maybe you have a nice pair of socks. Maybe you have a lucky pair of underwear. So many people have a piece of jewelry, a piece of clothing, a small photograph that they keep close to them, that they keep on their workplace, at their desk, that they believe enhances their performance. A very quick story. I was coaching an actress in Denmark. I said, "What is the scariest thing you do?" And she said, "Going to auditions. I hate going to auditions. You go to an audition, you just put your heart out, and they usually hate you. You can't see them very well. Even if you do well, you don't get the job. Auditions are terrible." I said, "Well, what helps you? What helps you face these terrible auditions?" She said, "My friends. I like the social support from my friends when they say, 'Yeah, you can do it.'" I said, "That's great. Have you ever talked to Sven about it?" She said, "I don't think I know Sven. Who's Sven?" I said, "Sven's in my pocket." She said, "What are you talking about?" and I pulled out a little action figure, a small toy, like this. I said, Sven travels with me everywhere. Sven's been to Kenya, Sven's been to China, Sven's been to India. Sven is not afraid of snakes. Sven is not afraid to report unethical behavior in the workplace. Sven is not afraid of auditions. I want you to have Sven. And I handed her this toy. It's just a piece of plastic. But she broke down crying. She was so moved by this because we have this capacity, this wonderful human psychological capacity to make everyday objects special in a way that actually improves our courage and our confidence and ultimately improves our performance. A year and a half later, she had taken Sven to every single audition she had gone to. Her work history was on the rise. She was getting more jobs than ever before. I followed up with her after 2 years. I said, how's Sven? She said, good. There's one problem, though. I was afraid of losing him. So I just put him next to my computer. And now when I go to an audition, we just high five. Just a quick high five, and then I go. That way I always know where he is. That's how wonderful magical thinking is, though. She doesn't even have to have Sven with her. She just has to touch Sven. One day, she'll learn that she can just think about Sven, and he'll work. And then one day, not long after that, she'll realize that Sven is just a toy, and that the power has been inside her all along. Increasing the willingness to act. I'm going to give you a single tip about increasing the willingness to act. I'll tell you a quick story, and then we'll finish. Here is my advice for increasing your willingness to act. Try failure. We avoid failure like it is death. We do not like public failure. We do not like the sting of losing out on a personal goal. But I think failure is important. It is an important learning mechanism. It is important in trial and error. I believe that failure is important in management. I prescribe failure. And I'm a doctor, so have to listen to that. There is a very little-known study out of Harvard by Ellen Langer. Ellen took 2 groups of people. She wanted them both to do public speaking. People are generally afraid of public speaking. The first group, she said, just do your best. The second group, she said, I want you to make a mistake. Embrace failure. Make a mistake on purpose, and then work with it. The group who made the mistake on purpose reported less fear, they enjoyed giving the talk more, and the audience liked their talk more. I am not telling you to tolerate failure. I am not telling you to accept failure. I do not think that those are radical enough. I am saying embrace failure. Low-stakes failure is so good for our learning process. Of course, you don't want to have high-stakes failure. You don't want to launch a product after 3 years of planning and then have it fail. That's not the type of failure I'm talking about. I'm talking about the day-to-day failure. In my own consultancy, every morning when we have our daily team meeting, I recommend to my people that they go out and make a few mistakes and that they fail. I create a culture where it's acceptable. Because we are a fluid, dynamic, creative bunch, and we know that everything that we try will not work out, but we have tons of room for failure, because every failure we gets to be a piece of experience that we can leverage for more success later on. I want to close with a story from Alex Lindley, the managing director of the Center of Applied Positive Psychology in the United Kingdom. I recently asked Alex, what is the most courageous thing you have ever done? And it's interesting because Alex has swum across this lake. This is called Lindley. It is the coldest lake in the United Kingdom. On the day Alex swam across this lake, it was 2 degrees. They had to carve a channel in the ice. There's ice around the side of that lake. He had to have a boat and a diver go with him for safety because his muscles would freeze. But he really wanted to do this because when his daughter was born, she had a problem with her heart. And he took her to the hospital, and the hospital performed a life-saving operation. And Alex vowed on that day that he would give back to the hospital. And he raised 50,000 pounds by doing this swim and donated the 50,000 pounds to the hospital that had saved his daughter's life. And in doing so, he also inspired the 15 people who work for him. But when I asked him what the most difficult thing, the most courageous thing that he does is, I was shocked by his answer. He did not mention this extreme swim. He said, the most difficult thing I do, the thing that really requires the most courage, the place where I really have to push down my fear, the place where I really have to throw myself in and commit to action, is recruitment. It's hiring people. It is so much easier to hire someone than it is to fire someone. When it doesn't work out well, we try and work it out. It still doesn't work out. It's a bad fit. I have to dismiss someone. I can do that. That's part of leadership. But taking a risk on bringing someone into the organization, knowing that bringing them into our family will change our culture in some small way, making the decision to take that amount of money that could be reinvested somewhere else and invest it in this one individual. I do that again and again and again, and every time I do it, I lose sleep over it. That is courage. And I think that that's an extraordinary answer because when we think about the simple process of management, we tend not to think of it as being fundamentally about taking risk, fundamentally about managing fear in a psychological way, fundamentally about committing to perseverance and action. We think about it in terms of motivation, performance, the bottom line. But I think this is how we get there, by realizing that you have the opportunity every single day for heroic, courageous action at work. I have been told, as I close here, that I am to announce to you 2 things. One, apparently, there is a booth where I'm going to be after this, and if you care to visit me there, sign a book, something like that, I will be there. It's the JTI booth in the corner. And the second is my own announcement, which is I want to hear from you. If you have a story of courage at work, of something that you just realized you yourself have done that's courageous, please absolutely contact me. I want to hear from you because I think that the more we start talking about and defining courage in the workplace, the more we're going to see it. Thank you.
Robert Wispasdiener,
Thanks.
thank you very much. We have a souvenir for you for this wonderful trip to Turkey and for this great talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Robert Wispasdiener'ı alkışlarla uğurluyoruz.